Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Alt Investor Podcast. It's our attempt to equip you with the right knowledge and provide you a way of alternative thinking before you make your decisions with respect to alternative investments. My name is Yashunta, and today I have Om Shukla with me. Our guests are Mathew Samuel and Tarun Joseph, who are the co-founder of SundayGrids, a platform that enables you to offset your electricity bills by investing in digital solar. SundayGrids is also a RainMatter funded startup, a VC firm by Zerodha. So, in this podcast, let's dive deeper into what they do and how they do it, and how you can help decarbonize India by putting your investment to good use. Uh, Welcome, Matt and Tarun. Thank you so much for taking the time to record this. How are you doing today?
Yeah, pretty great. Yeah, just kicked off the weekend, so yeah, going quite well.
And have to record it over the weekend,
No,
I
no.
know.
Like one of the most questions we get is since we are called Sunday Grids, is like, do you guys work on Sundays? I don't know why, but this is the most often asked question we get.
But okay, so that's an interesting point. So, why did you put the name Sunday Grids? What was your
Oh,
idea about it, and why? What is Sunday Grids? Let's start with that.
I mean, once we kind of got to know that, okay, this is what we wanted to work around, this is the space we wanted to be in, then of course started the name hunting process, right? Like, what do we call it? What do we name this thing? We knew what we did not want. That is the answer. We did not want anything to go, say, eco, solar, surya, like anything on those spectrum. So, of all the things, okay, so there is this part of the story, but the other part of the story is also out of the ones that we wanted. I mean, this is probably the only one where we got the domain name and the handles. So we just then stuck to it. But essentially, the idea was, I mean, Sunday has a pretty nice connotation to it, right? Like it's a good vibes. And more importantly, one other thing we wanted to do was we wanted to name that, Sunday, like, even if you're not a natively English speaker, is something that, you would it's one of those really high recallable names, right? So we just wanted to have something that people could at least recall pieces of what we are called as. So yeah, that's where Sunday Grids came in, and Sunday also has sun in it. So that was it. Yeah, one of the ways to get that done without having to say eco or green or any of those things. So
But do you
yeah,
actually work on Sundays then?
huh?
Do you
Well, not officially, but work never stops also. So yeah, right.
Great. So tell us, I mean, how did Sunday Grids come about, and how did you guys also meet Matt,
Yeah.
Tarun? I think we have one more co-founder as well,
Yeah,
right,
Nasser.
Nasir?
Yeah, yeah. A
Yeah.
little bit
So,
straight. Yeah.
what was your journey like before Sunday Grids, and how did you strategize Sunday Grids? Or
Right. So me and Tarun, we both are designers. I'm a
okay,
product designer. He's a user experience designer. We actually went to college together in Pune.
okay.
So I think yeah, since then we've been collaborating, riffing off on each of our projects since then, and we kind of knew we wanted to work something together sometime later as well. With regards to Sunday grids, for me, like by the time I kind of got done with college, I kind of saw myself gravitating towards climate, energy, and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, both academically as well as from a personal interest point of view as well. So then I was like, you know what? Once college was over, I was like, or during the final phases of it, I was like, I think I have enough grassroots, I mean, enough bookish understanding of the space and the challenges involved. But it's about time that we sort of get a grassroots level understandings, go there, actually see these panels, build some of them, etc. So then scouting for opportunities to do that led me to a nonprofit here in Bangalore called Selco Foundation.
Okay.
Over there, I was working as a designer, and what they do is they work around energy access as a subject, and they essentially build solutions around South Asia, Africa, so on and so forth. And that's where I met my other co-founder, Nasser. He's an electrical engineer over
Okay.
there. So a lot of the origin points are the things that led to starting Sunday Grid started from conversations we have had since then. To sort of condense and come to the point is essentially what we started realizing is when you talk about climate, right? Or rather even solar, we see that of course there is one, the whole climate awareness aspect to it, and the second is what it does for you on a the personal benefits that you get out of it, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and we were kind of surrounded by peers also who was into climate as who were working towards climate goals. But then interestingly enough, the more people we go around and ask about, hey, have you gone solar, right?
Mm-hmm.
The more people we ask, as our size of the more people we keep asking, we see further and further smaller set of people who actually say, yeah, you know what, I do. So there was a really interesting dichotomy. What we did with it is like, so since this was, I mean, this was a pretty weird, unexpected result for us. But then, anyways, what we did was we essentially started, sort of probing further into why is that the case. And what we sort of like realized is today, when it comes to going solar, there is essentially three buckets of problems involved, right? Number one, if you look at where does that sort of financial wherewithal exist and have the sort of, that awareness exist around climate, we see a large concentration of that in our tier one, tier two cities. But then again, if you look into how do people live in these places, mostly it's apartment buildings, or and a lot of people also migrate into the cities as well, right? So they live as tenants, so on and so forth. And then secondly, even if you're always constantly crowded up by taller structures, trees, whatnot, which essentially means how much of your usable roof space you have is the other big question. But that is on the sort of technical side of things. But there's also a large amount of cognitive burden, I would say, regarding going solar. One of them is essentially the fact that solar systems generally are slated to survive for 20, 25 years. Are you sure you're going to be in that same space for the next 20, 25 years? And more importantly, do you want to take this up as a commitment, right? Because you're adding one more appliance to your house, and essentially something you need to clean, take care of. If anything goes wrong, it's an electronic equipment that requires troubleshooting, so on and so forth. So a lot of people are like, there's a lot of friction when it comes to making that commitment as well. And then obviously the other last and really important piece to it as well is today, if I have to go solar, I will have to install, let's say, a 5 kilowatt system for my personal requirements for my household. But then that's going to cost me somewhere around 3 to 4 lakhs, right? And so in generally, when it comes to solar, the entry barrier is also quite high, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like I mean, people would like to have a feel of what it is that they're getting into and before they sort of come into. And today, solar has that large friction of the entry is not very easy for a lot of people. So this is essentially I think in 2020 is when three of us came together and we were talking about these things. And what we realized is it will be a really interesting opportunity for us if we can figure
Mm-hmm.
out how to use the internet as a distribution layer, right? Like the analogy in our head is essentially cloud compute, cloud storage, etc. Like how we don't no longer carry our hard drives around, but rather we have it on the cloud and we push it in, right? Is it possible in such similar framework? Is it possible for us to decouple going solar from the space that you have? Right today, they're both almost synonymistic, right? Essentially, the
Mm-hmm.
amount of space you have is how you determine how much solar you can install and the quality of the output that you get out of it. So yeah, that's where the sort of the initial starting point to it was to figure out how to build community solar projects in India.
So that's what you call digital solar as well, right? Solar on the cloud is
Yeah.
something that you have told, I think so, in a couple of interviews as well, that
Mhm.
you keep photos on the cloud, you keep videos on the cloud. Why not put solar on the cloud as well and then
Yeah.
earn
I
money
mean,
off it?
yeah, it's analogically, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, if you had to, let's say, explain very, to a layman, what is digital solar in one or two lines? What
Yeah.
is it like,
Right. So instead of you having to put panels on your rooftop, you
right?
reserve from a larger project, and whatever
Okay.
power gets generated out of it, they get swapped for on-bill credits. What are on-bill credits? They are credits on your power bill, essentially. So today you go solar to basically reduce your power bills and your energy cost. So in a similar fashion, through by reserving digital solar, you get to do the same thing. But instead, the benefit here is it's not on your rooftop. It doesn't matter where you live or where you're gonna move next to. And more importantly, you don't have to worry about the hassles of cleaning, maintaining, getting the whole thing installed, etc. All of that is managed out
Mhm.
for you.
So, if I have to ask, let's say, when you started this idea or project per se, was it that you wanted to build an investment product, or was it like you want to help with India's 2070 goals of decarbonization? Like, what was your ideology of where were you coming from to build out this? And of course, you got funded by Zerodha as well. I don't think that's a small feature. So, what was that journey also like? How did you convince RainMatter Foundation? to give you some money.
Yeah. So ideologically, it's more on the climate aspects, right?
Okay.
In many ways, both personally as well as from the places where I'm coming from, etc. Climate impact has been really visible as well, and
Okay.
so I kind of realized this is kind of the work that I want to be doing. That is my personal story, but I think like
Hmm.
in generally, once we started thinking around it, I think we all found it like a really cool product that if not us, somebody should build it, and there requires a relevance of something like this to exist. So that is about it. The investment angle sort of was something that sort of organically sprung up as we kept talking to more people. Again, end of the day, it's savings on your power bill, right? So then people do
Hmm.
take a consideration from an economic point of view as well. And I think in many ways, it's just like, today you go get an electric vehicle, you're probably thinking about climate, obviously, but more importantly, you're thinking about how do I reduce my running cost, right? With the increasing fuel prices. So, in a similar analogy, we are like, yeah, that we need to, whatever we're doing over there, we need to figure out an equivalent of that for solar, where we are able to make solar better, faster, and cheaper. And the amalgamation of all those three things is essentially what SundayGrids ended up being.
Hmm.
Now, regarding the whole Zerodha story, we got connected with them through a common friend, as in
Okay.
someone who knew someone who was working in Zerodha. Through we were part of an IIM NSARCL startup cohort and got to know about them through there.
Ah, okay, sir. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Fine.
And essentially had a couple of chats. They found the directional alignment quite nice, and even we
Mhm.
found them to be also people who,
Yeah.
had a pretty long term view into things. And
Okay.
I know people like to throw long term as a, especially we talk to other VCs, but they genuinely had it. And they also kind of helped even before, they kind of invested in us because one thing we realized is we sort of come in the intersection of the energy systems as well as on the financial side of things with the way credits work and whatnot. And they're pretty stringent when it comes to regulatory aspects, right? As a brand as well, Zerodha as well. So they're like, you know what? Before we even make a decision, why don't we just help you, give our legal teams, etc., so that you can
Mhm.
figure out what that architecture needs to be. So a lot of
Understood.
our early work was done with that, and that was really
Wow.
cool. Like even before they put their first dollar in us, they were like they had that sort of they were ready to help us that way. So we quite liked them in that way. It was pretty nice. And yeah, so in 2022 is when we raised our sort of pre-seed, the first set of money that we had in it.
So, Matthew, you said, you basically give an option to offset your electricity bills by taking on bigger commercial projects. So, my natural question is, how do you select where to install these commercial projects? What is the size of this projects? What is the due diligence that you do? How does it all work?
Right. So a little bit about hosting in general, like what
Yeah.
it is or what we do, etc. So I'd like to take a step back and to talk about today. If I had the space to put solar panels, what would essentially happen, right? When I essentially install systems on my rooftop, I have an opportunity to do net metering. That is essentially instead of me having to have a battery, I can plug this entire system onto the grid, and the utility will offtake the power when I'm not using it. But when I would need it, they will essentially give it back to me, right? They're essentially borrowing it from you. You borrow and then you return. And the other side, essentially, the other model is essentially the utilities follow is gross metering. And gross metering is essentially where instead of borrowing it, the utility buys the power from you, right?
Mhm.
So essentially, whatever surplus power you have, etc., what the utility does is essentially say, you know what, for every unit of power, I'll give you 3 to 4 rupees, right? And if it, either they could essentially, compensate you on as hard cash and a quarterly basis, annual basis, or they could be like, you have to pay me your electricity bills anyways. Why don't I add this as discounting on top? And that's where the on bill credit models come from. So essentially, what we do is basically we build a virtual gross metering system, is essentially what SundayGrids does, right? And
Mhm.
what is special about the way we do and what we do is essentially today, when you look at these kind of community solar projects or even gross metering projects, they're essentially limited to your jurisdiction. So if you live in Bangalore, you will have Bescom as your utility and nobody else, right? In You will have Tata Power, Adani, etc., depending on whatever jurisdiction you belong to. What we sort of wanted to do was give our users the freedom to be wherever they are, right? So that meant We didn't necessarily want to be like, yeah, let me build a project in Bombay, and therefore I'd be able to cater to only audiences in Bombay, right? In order to sort of open that up, what we realize is today we have a technology play, which is essentially Bharat Bill Pay. That is the today when we use Google Pay, Paytm, etc. to pay our power bills, we are essentially tapping into it. Now this is built concurrently with, let's say, UPI, FASTag, etc. It's built as part of the India tech stack, right? So that becomes like a sort of a fair playing field for all the utilities to be present, as well as what it allows is for intermediaries like Google Pay, Paytm, or even SundayGrids is essentially to read a customer's power bill and also to pay on behalf of it, right? So that's essentially what we do. Now, the reason why I brought up that whole gross metering side of things is that it's not that the utility has a battery of itself, where it takes a power and stores it somewhere. What it does is it finds another active load and pushes the power to it, right?
Mhm.
And they're matching the grid ka load at all times. So later, when you are essentially taking power, they're delivering power to you itself. But now they were able to monetize on your power by offloading it to a active load elsewhere. So when we started working around it, we were like, okay, what is that equivalent of that going to be? What is going to be the active loads to which these solar panels can be connected, right?
Mhm.
And so that's essentially where the idea of, and we saw that what we could deploy around this is essentially what we often call as an OPEX solar model. It's often
Mhm.
interchangeably called OPEX or a solar subscription or a RESCO. RESCO just stands for Renewable Energy Services. Well, so what we do is that we go around and we identify locations and buildings that essentially run on commercial meters. Today,
Okay.
we run on domestic residential meters, right? What
Mhm.
we do is we focus on commercial meters because today, commercial tariffs are nearly 30-40% higher than domestic rates.
Mhm.
Once we identify those, and there's another inherent reason as well, which is essentially they have the space to, let's say, install a 100, 200 kilowatt system, whereas a residential rooftop won't take anything more than 5 kilowatts, right? So, and with that kind of a scale of instead of building a 5 kilowatt system, building a 100 kilowatt system gives us better economics, better scale,
Mhm.
and also it reduces our operating overheads in many ways. So that's essentially the ticket sizes we work around. We typically float around 100, 150 kilowatts of capacity is what we build at per site, right?
Mhm.
Now what we do is, now there is an sort of a interaction between and a relationship between us and the host, right? For the host, the reason why they would opt for an OPEX system is essentially that instead of today, the other options are to put a CAPEX. In this model, they would not have to put anything upfront, right? There's a security
Mhm.
deposit we collect, but beyond that, they don't have to put anything upfront. And essentially, they're getting savings from day one because what we do is for the power generated from the solar system, we give it to these guys at residential rates.
Okay.
Today they're paying commercial rates, so now they're paying residential rates, and now that delta is basically their savings,
So
right?
can you give me an example as to what's the difference? Like if you talk about Mumbai, what's the commercial rate per
Right.
kilowatt hour in
That,
residential?
that that can go to 12, 13 rupees. And Bombay
Commercially.
commercial rates can be 12, 13 rupees per unit. Whereas what we do is then we charge it 6.5 rupees to the for the power
Wow. So
generated.
half, almost
Yeah,
half.
almost half, right?
Okay.
So yeah, and but Bombay is one of those use cases where it's that drastic between what a residential tariff rate is and what a commercial tariff rate is. But I mean, but generally that delta exists across India as well, like everywhere you
And
go.
I guess this six and a half rupees is locked in for next 15 years, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. And your 12 to 13 rupees will kind of grow with the inflation as to what the power utility company is doing. So it's a win-win for them.
Yeah. So essentially,
Okay.
and what we also again, like how you mentioned, what we do is so this contract that we have with them is typically what's
Yes.
called as a power purchase agreement, right?
Okay.
Now, power purchase agreement, I mean, it has a bunch of clauses, but the two important aspects to it is one, A, what the tariff is going to be, and the second part is for how long is the duration of this contract going to be.
Okay.
And typically, what we do is we do 15-year contracts. And so that
Okay.
means if the panels last for, let's say, 20 or 25 years, right? For the next 5, 10 years is essentially the power generate. I mean, we essentially what we do is after the 15th year, the ownership is transferred to them. So essentially, that means whatever power gets generated after that period is essentially free of cost for them. So that kind of prices into their consideration of okay, should I choose an OPEX model? Should I go for a lease? Should I go for CAPEX? So on and so forth.
So I
right?
guess the win-win is that they don't have to pay anything upfront. They don't have to do any maintenance, and
Yeah,
their electricity bill goes by half directly. So your
yeah,
demand side, I think so, is pretty solid
yeah,
in terms of, why would people want this kind of model? My question is, since your demand side is solid, how do you select, okay, this is who I will go with? What's the other due diligence
right.
that you do? Whether they will be able to pay or not, whether any damage to the asset can happen, you might have to figure those sort of things out as well, right?
Absolutely. That's like a large part of the operational side of things that we do. So there are two ways to look into it, right? One is on the panel side, whatever can be insured, we insure them, etc. So that is protected. And on the payment flow side of things, we have the security deposit and some other buffer systems in place so that also get managed. But regarding to how do we choose, okay, you know what, this is the ideal place to install panels, etc., is that one, we prefer to build more on housing societies to begin with. Okay.
Okay.
Now, the reason why we do that is essentially if you think about risk, right? It's a spread of the risk also gets spread. If instead of just a one single entity, let's say I have a factory and we put panels on top of the factory, etc. Essentially, that's a single point of failure. If they have a liquidity problem,
Failure.
payment
Yeah.
problem, that's a single point of failure. But what happens in a housing society like approach, right? A, you continuously have a lot of people in it, and also more importantly, you're spreading that risk between multitudes of folks, right? So they're great paymasters in many ways. So that's like one reason why we kind of opt for those. Now, in terms of selecting, obviously one is the technical considerations, like does it have ample space? Can we actually build it in scale that we want to? We would like to reduce again on the technical side, the number of meters, etc., etc. All of that gets into accounting. But more importantly, from a diligence of a housing society perspective, we look into what is the corpus fund size are like. We look into what the occupancy rates are like, right? These are some of the
Mm-hmm.
parameters that we keep in mind while we go for it. Now, there are projects that we do on commercial rooftops as well. Like one of the live projects right now is on a one Lodha place.
Okay.
It's in Lower Parel in Bombay. So with those folks, what we essentially do is we look at their credit ratings, etc., to basically make sure whether they are good for their money. That's the one of the other approaches we take into play.
Okay. And I understand you are not from finance background or any sort of due diligence background, right? So do you have an external partner for doing this kind of due diligence, or how does it work? Do you have someone in your team,
Yeah.
or
So yeah, I mean, we have our CA, etc., who we interface with on a regular basis to understand the validity of certain things, what their cash flows look like, so on and so forth, just to see if it's a good fit for us or not. But in generally, like as I mentioned, like because we do mostly housing societies, that we have a good picture of what is it that we need to look into their vendor payment frequencies, etc. So these are some of the aspects that we keep into mind.
Mhm. And what happens, let's say, if the housing society stops consuming power from that solar panels that you have installed? Like, is there any mechanism where because right now, as I understand, so the housing society has a PPA with SundayGrids. They will
Hmm.
pay you whatever power they consume, and you will then ultimately pay back to the investors for the capacity of solar that they have reserved via
Absolutely.
your platform.
Yeah.
And that will you are targeting somewhere around 12% IRR, right?
Right.
Over a period of 15 years. Now, what happens if that housing society, for whatsoever reason, stops using electricity from the solar panel, or a natural calamity occurs and you're not able to use the solar panels?
Right. Right.
Uh,
Yeah. So, I mean, that's you need to sort of break down that into a couple of pieces. So,
yeah.
one is to talk about calamities, fire, theft, and some places even animal disturbances can become one of those reasons, right? So, for all of those things, essentially the systems are insured. So, in case any damage, etc., happens, we have replacements, warranties, everything in place. Now, in terms of the housing society's consumption, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
the other critical piece here. So, one, because these projects are all net metered, which means at any given point, if there is a surplus of power, we essentially offload it to the grid, and then
Mm-hmm.
later at night, whenever they consume. So we know that the power consumption is almost 100%. Whatever power gets generated gets consumed. Furthermore, at a design stage itself, what we do is we do not address 100% of their power requirement. We cut off our capacity utilization factor, that's what we call them, at around 80% of their requirement. So that way we
Okay.
know that even at best case scenarios, all the power generated is getting consumed internally and locally, right? And essentially now what we do for a housing society like this is that we power purely on their common loads. Now remember before this we had a conversation about residential tariff, commercial tariff, etc. And now then the
Mhm.
question, why do we focus on housing societies, right? That's because while residents pay, residential tariff for their homes, our common loads, right? The elevator, the sewage treatment plants, lighting, etc. Those run on a commercial meter. So
Yes.
what we do is that we generate the power required, but specifically for that, for the local load, the common load consumption. And that is something because lights getting switched on every day, elevators being used, sewage treatment. These are things that we can forecast and to a really high confident rates. So we do know what we are
Mhm.
looking for in terms of that. Now the other part is they consume the power, but what if they don't pay us, right? That's when the security deposit, etc., comes into play. However, there's an
Yep.
intermediary stage here as well. Say, for instance, I'm just giving you an example, like the elevator needs some work, so now they come in and they switch off the power, right? So that they
Mhm.
can get the maintenance work done. So
Mhm.
essentially, in situations like that, we have in our power purchase agreements a clause called deemed generation. That is essentially,
Mhm.
this is the generation that would have happened if you had not switched off the system, right? And that is
Okay.
a schedule that we release along with our PPA so that that's something both parties can adhere to. So essentially, based upon that deemed generation value, us and furthermore our users essentially get the credits that they were supposed to get out of it for that time period.
Understood. So, okay, that makes sense. Now, in terms of, whatever returns the investor is getting, is that also anyway dependent on the weather?
Oh,
Let's say,
yeah.
if you're in summer, you might
Yeah.
get more returns. If you're in winter or rainy season,
Yes.
might get less. How does that work? Like,
Yeah. So you're absolutely true. So now the amount of credits you get is dependent on three things, right? One is the tariff rate, as we discussed in the PPA. Second is how much capacity you're reserving, and the third aspect is how much sunlight falls onto it. Right? Sunlight.
okay.
It's a more or less a direct proportional result from the sunlight being hit on the panels. Now that will vary, right? So in your monsoon time, June, July, August, you basically have heavy monsoons in Bombay, and then you have your summer periods in March, April, etc. That time period as well. So what we do is that when there are a couple of things has happened, right? One, now because so much solar has already been developed naturally, we have good enough historical data as well as we have good
Mhm.
enough predictable weather data as well. So a lot of that goes into accounting when we do our simulations of what the output is going to be. And on the other hand, essentially what we do is we take a slightly more seasonal point of view onto this. We account for all the four seasons, so we know that all in all, in a year, we're going to have three seasons, and this is basically what the output is going to be, right? And this is something
Mhm.
that we track on a monthly basis, etc. So essentially, overall, while your monsoons are you're going to get a dip, you're going to get far more output in your summers, and essentially because of the nature of credits themselves, they can be carry forwarded as well. So in let's say you generate far more credits, those surplus credits can be used during your monsoon period. And this is also beneficial for situations like you go for a vacation, you're not at home, so on and so forth. So all of those credits will also get accumulated and you can keep using them in the upcoming months.
Got it. So, I mean, in terms of how long generally are these investments for? I think so. The ballpark number is 15 years, right?
Right.
On the
That's on the upper end. That's on the upper end. I mean, that's because contractually those panels last for, I mean, we run the PPAs for that long. But as a user, because the exposure to the PPA is as a service, right? Essentially, they can come in and they can exit whenever they would want to.
So how do I exit? Let's say, do I go back to you guys saying that can you buy back my PPA
Yes.
agreement on my reservation?
Yes. Yeah.
And
There's a button on the, once you get into your dashboard, there's a button over there, that, like, when you go into your settings, you can probably be like, yeah, I would like to exit my reservation. And essentially, that would mean, and they can be for multiple reasons, right? Like, you could, just like how I mentioned, traveling within India becomes, and there's a freedom in that with the model we work with. But say you go outside India, right? For instance, then you essentially, the model doesn't work for you at all. In situations like that, essentially, what you like, you can be like, yeah, you know what? I would like to exit. And it's not just that, you could also decide for a partial exit as well. Like, I would like to exit like a certain portion of it as well. At that point, what we do is there is a buyback clause that we have with our users. That's part of our service
okay,
agreement with them. So that's again something that we give it to our users from day one onwards. So they can always refer to that. But more importantly, then what we do is we take that capacity and we put it up back on our platform for someone else who would be interested to reserve.
hmm
So is this so let's say I do a buyback option. is the payment instantaneous, or when someone on your platform comes and buys back my portion of that reserves, that is when I get
No,
the
no,
payment?
you don't have to wait for someone to exit. You to purchase that. You essentially, it's just it takes a week. That's about it. There's some KYC aspects, but
Got
beyond
it.
that, that's about it.
Fair.
Just to summarize then, I mean, from an investor point of view, there is no lock-in of 15 years.
Yeah.
You can liquidate your investment at any given point, and I think so you have a refund calculator on your website where
Yes.
people will know exactly what money they will be getting.
Absolutely.
Now, my next question is, when you are, let's say, getting onto these projects, you are, commercially setting these up. Do you put your own upfront capital when you're setting this up, like your SundayGrids own capital, or how does it work?
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, to get things started, because to basically start things off, we put up our capital. So we have a rolling fund, which so we invest in system A, and then we put it up on our platform, and then once it gets fully reserved, we recoup our money, and then we put it into system B. But that's for the short term. Long term, what we already started to work towards is to basically get other solar installers like IPPs and so on to come and get their own projects into our platform, where now we are not taking care of the project side of things, but rather just being the platform that facilitates, or sort of meets the demand and supply. So yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, how do you manage this kind of capital? Because, as a startup, your books are already stressed, right? You are putting all your operational working capital into a big project, which you might know whether this will sell or not,
Yeah.
at this stage. And till the time, let's say the reservation is not sold, whatever money is coming from the PPA basically then comes and goes into your own
Correct.
account, something like
Correct.
that, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that's a risky model, I would say, from my perspective, because you're taking the risk on your books,
Right.
particularly. I mean,
So
from a
again, just let's count for what that risk value is, right? So essentially, let's say we install a 100 kilowatt system, right? That's going to cost us 50 lakhs. Right?
Mhm.
And it's not that we put all our money up front on day one and that gets locked out until the system gets built, right? All of this sort of rolls out in tranches, essentially. So we have a
Okay.
build. So at any given point, we have projects at different stages of its life cycle. Some might be operational and on the platform. Some might be on the commissioning period, and some might be in the audit installation, that kind of segment as well. So at different time periods, right? So essentially, what we do is we don't necessarily have more than 50 lakhs locked in to any of the projects at any given time, because we build out a project, we open it up, when we get the reservations to a certain threshold, that is only when the next set of projects get released. So we don't have to necessarily have that lock in. Now, like Tarun mentioned, right? Essentially, our goal was to build the technology sets to enable this and not necessarily be the arbitrary solar financing side of things necessarily. So essentially, one of the things that we're doing is we realized there's a ton of these OPEX players in India who basically building these projects out of their balance sheets, right?
Yeah.
Now, typically when they do that, that's what he meant by an IPP. IPP stands for an independent power provider, right? So you have them across India. Now, the thing is, essentially, for an IPP, just because their recoupment is going to happen based on the amount of the power dividends, essentially, right? The break-even period for them necessarily floats around 5 to 6 years, right? With a
Wow.
platform like this, what we are then able to do is shrink that window from 5 years to, let's say, 5 months or so, because now we can get it accessible to other people. So that is essentially phase two that we are rolling out right now. I think in mid-Jan, Feb, we'll be having some of our first external projects in our platform.
Wow. Interesting. I mean, yeah, that makes sense as well.
So I think we'll just move to the very specifics. So as you explained, the credits are debited to our sort of wallet, and then
Yes.
that is offset against the electricity bill.
Power bills.
So
Yes.
this is, in a sense, it's a discount on our electricity
Correct.
bill. So is it by any chance taxable, or any tax incident on that transaction?
No. So essentially today, right, there are two things happening. One, we generate power and we push it to, let's say, on the local premises itself. This is typically what's called as captive power generation. And in India, captive power generation is taxed at zero. It's to
Okay.
accelerate the solar and everything that the government has done. So that is on one end. Yeah.
12% IRR, roughly tax-free.
Tax
Yes.
free. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's pretty cool. I mean, if you can lock in that kind of rate for another 15 years.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I mean,
Yeah,
I would
it's
also
decent.
look at the CAGR numbers once, but yeah, I mean, 12% IRR for I guess 10 years lock-in is it's a good deal.
Yes, CAGR will be roughly around, I think so, 8 to 9%.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the problem here is different, right? You have an option to offset it against your electricity bills, and you are contributing to the India's decarbonization journey. So it's like solving two problems with one single kind of investment. So
Right.
of course, when you compare it with other alternative investments, the IRR might not sound that high, but
Mm-hmm.
again, it's an asset-backed product. There is
Right.
asset in the background,
Mm-hmm.
uh, a commercial level asset, which we'll talk about
Correct.
liquidation, how this will
Mm-hmm.
work, but
Yeah.
I think so. It's fair, especially for 15 years lock-in.
Exactly. So it's a consistent revenue that we are sort
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
getting credit that is fair.
But
So
this 12% IRR is rough, right? It's not because it will completely depend on the power generation, actual power generation. So it's a rough IRR based on the
right,
Mhm.
models that you have created.
Yeah. In
Yeah.
fact, our
right.
current project is doing far more than that, actually. Some 13.5.
Wow.
Yeah. It's just, so we are like, so essentially, that's the thing. When we say 12% IRR, right, we actually take into account of all the different aspects, such as degradation. And even when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to output, right, we get 4 good sunlight hours a day. That's like a rough calculation we do. But internally for our calculations, we actually go even conservative. We say, hey, you know what, let's account 3.5, 3.7, etc. So that we are on the safer end of things as well. So
Okay,
that's
got it.
based on that.
Interesting.
And
Right.
again, yeah, this is not that dependent on how the markets are doing. Also, right? It's dependent more on
Mm-hmm.
how is the sun and the weather, etc. So there is a little bit of that sort of stability that kind of comes in when you take a sort of long term. I mean, it can be erratic on a day to day basis, but on a seasonal cycle basis, it's pretty consistent throughout, and we get to
Mm-hmm.
forecast at a really high degree as well. So yeah, that's it. Okay,
Right.
coming back to what we were talking about. So that power generation is essentially is not taxed at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then essentially what SundayGrids act as is a wallet. It's essentially a closed wallet where we keep in and we collect that money in, right? And now what the wallet can do is essentially pay off your power bills. Now the paying of power bill piece as well, right? Electricity is taxed at zero. It's a zero GST commodity, and therefore there is no tax implication there. So if you ask what is the tax component at all here, that is on the reservation. So in reservation there will be an 18% GST. That's the tax component that is involved here.
Okay. So
And
while
yeah,
investment, we are supposed to pay that 18%.
yeah, that's an input you can
Right.
get. Yeah,
Okay. So, but when the company that has is in the PPA, when they pay you the
no tax on it.
monthly electricity bill, that's not taxable. Got it. So yeah. So moving on to the next question. So you said that there's a wallet and where the credit gets deposited. So is there any chance that we can convert that credit to cash in our bank accounts?
No, no. From the legal explorations we have done, no, because then that would mean essentially that's gains that you're getting, and so they will be
Mm-hmm.
taxed accordingly. Right now, because it's a wallet, it's not hitting your bank account at all. So again, there's
Mm-hmm.
no recording of that needs to be done at your end, and essentially it's being used to pay off your power bills.
Okay.
Yeah,
So next question. Let's say my electricity bill comes out at 3,000 a month,
correct.
and the credit that is generated in that month is 5,000. So can I
Okay.
use the remaining 2,000 to pay someone else's bill? Maybe my friend or
Yes.
someone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can actually do
Is it?
that.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh. So you
As
can
long as
just
it's power
upload their
bills,
electricity.
yeah, exactly. You just
Mm-hmm.
need the details and we
Okay.
can add it up. In fact, our users do that already. Like we have a couple of users. Like I'll give you an example. Someone who
Mm-hmm.
lives in Delhi uses the same solar capacity for their home, office, and their parents' place in Kerala. That happens. So there's a in fact, I do that. I think Tarun also does that. So yeah, like we can use those for our homes as well back home. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, reminds me of that Netflix. We have the same account, 4 of our friends, so we
Yeah.
use the same one.
So, guys, at the end of 15 years, if somebody has any credits left, would that collapse? Or, would you still have it available for them if they want to offset their bills in the future?
Yeah, so essentially, the power generation stops right after the
Right?
15th year. But
Yeah.
if there's any residual credits that's left over there, you can sort of in the next coming 1 or 2 months, if you haven't paid the last 2 months, etc., that value can be used. That's not an issue, right?
Okay. And sorry, on the commercial side of things, at the end of 15 years, the solar project gets
Transferred to
Transferred.
the host.
transferred to the host,
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
right? And does the host pay you any money, or your model is such that it gets transferred to them at a nominal cost or something?
Yeah, it's an anomaly. I think there's a 1 rupee transaction just
One
to
rupee,
record
yeah.
it.
Just
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
sure. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's called a
Right.
both model. So we wanted to model ourselves
Mhm.
as the most common OpEx system. So that's why you can ask why not 20 years, why not 5 years, 10 years, etc. We took 15 years because as an industry, this is where the OpEx markets look like. And as I mentioned, right, our goal is not necessarily to keep building, financing this project, etc., but to build the framework that is most compatible with most of the other OpEx players out there.
Right. I think we'll move to the next question. And me and Mathew have discussed on this for quite a long time, and there was an
Yeah.
extensive piece that we did on it. So, what if Sunday Grids defaults? What if the safety mechanism in place for us investor? Maybe, and you can cover it if the Sunday Grids defaults, and maybe if one of the project gets default, just one of the projects.
Right. So what we do in those scenarios, right? Like, so as I mentioned, like the way we look at it is, okay, at a product level, nothing should happen to the panels if there's warranties and guarantees in place and insurances in place. And then there's security deposit and other payment. There's a penalty system also if they don't pay on time as well. That is also part of the PPA. So that is all of those things basically encourage the host to pay on time, etc. Right. And the last piece of the system is basically those credits that I get from the host should come to the users. And the intermediary to that is SundayGrids. Now, what happens if something happens to SundayGrids in itself, right? Or if we ourselves are not able to manage those projects in any ways. So there are essentially two sets of things that happen. I mean, in fact, one large piece, which is essentially these projects and liquidating those projects are considered separately from the rest of us as SundayGrids, because SundayGrids is not just the projects but also the tech stack and everything else, right? So what we do is, in case of those kind of situations that come in, essentially we liquidate the assets, and the service agreement that we have essentially says that, okay, whatever in secondary markets, when you liquidate these assets, whatever you get on a pro rata basis. So say you own 5% of the capacity, Tarun owns 10%, etc. On a pro rata basis, that gets spread across to all the users as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
Makes
if something else that is also happening, but we just realized when we went down that rabbit hole, we realized there's another application that we could be building around it as well. So there is this portal that the government has, IBC has, where you can actually say who are your creditors, etc., and basically manage
Okay.
it. So we are now figuring out how is it that we can connect our users directly to that portal, so that there's a government intermediary in place who has a ledger of who owns what, etc. And then essentially what we can, and what they also get to do is they get on a yearly basis, etc. They also get a recording, the receipt of everything that's going on. So it's something that really helps those operational creditors in many ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can share across
So-
a link. It's something we are looking to figure out how to integrate with now.
I mean,
Yeah.
it really sounds interesting because so you are
Yeah.
telling me that all of your investors, you can register them on the IBC website. So
Yeah.
if in case Sunday Grids goes, for default,
Down, yes, IBC knows
Right.
who to pay what to whom.
okay, that is really helpful. Actually, that would actually ease the entire liquidation process.
Exactly.
Pretty
So,
interesting, and I think so. This will be first in the industry. I haven't seen any of the other even asset leasing platforms do this kind of thing right now. So, but this is in your pipeline, right? You're not,
yes.
you're still exploring how this will work.
Right.
Yeah.
So the way we see it is, as we hold ourselves to the most stringent rules internally as well, because we know that tomorrow when we are not the ones who's doing it and there are other projects we list on the platform, we need to really dwell that even further, right? So we are just building the
So
tools
you
that's
guys are
required.
setting a benchmark so that the new players that come in, they know
Yeah.
that okay, this is the quality.
Very
that we-
cool. Very
Yeah.
interesting. I'm very happy to hear that actually.
Yeah.
And
So, I mean,
Yeah.
as an investor, it's a good thing for us. I guess for you guys, it becomes a bit hectic.
But
painful.
yeah. It's worth its while. So yeah.
Yeah. So fair, I think so. So given what we know about all of you guys and what you have said about the company, Yash, do you think you would invest in Sunday Grid deals?
Putting me on the spot right there. I would say personally, I am very passionate about climate as well. I mean, we see right now, I am sitting in London and I'm reading about, air quality in Delhi, AQI reaching 470, 480, all that sort of stuff, which is very concerning because right now I'm planning my move to India in January permanently. And it makes me think, oh shit, will I have to live in that kind of air quality forever? Uh, so it always brings to my mind, and I work here in the space where ESG or environmental, social, and governance is a big topic as well, and big area for investments as well in the asset management world. I think India will soon have its own time as well in terms of asset, management in the ESG space. More and more money is coming into these projects, and SundayGrids personally has made it into an innovative model on how to invest in, get some returns out of it, which you can offset with your own electricity bills as well. So yeah, I would definitely say I would give it a shot. I wouldn't go big on it right now, very honestly, just because it's a commitment for another 15 years, which I think so is long in my opinion.
Yeah.
I have
You
the
have the
option to
option to,
liquidate, but still I don't want to get into that hassle at this stage. I would say 15 years is a long, long time to lock in something. So yeah, I would definitely give it a try, and if things go well for another 2, 3 years, I might decide to go big as well. That's that's
Awesome.
honest feedback.
Awesome. Yeah, no, great.
Tarun and Matthew, thank you so much. Very comprehensive, and what you're doing is amazing. Especially, I like the UX. Tarun, so great job there because I know you have worked on it. Just to, let's say, end it up, how do you guys do your own? I know you're very young as well, so how do you do your own personal investments as well? How much have you invested in your own solar reservation capacities, or do you look at anything else as well? Just as a fun question for audience to know.
Yeah, TJ, you go ahead.
Investment, typically mutual funds. That's what I
Right.
go into. In regards to SundayGrids, so my parents have an account and I have an account as well,
Okay.
and so like in that sense, we sort of take care of both the bills. So when they sort of got to know that this is something that I'm working on, they had this mindset of, okay, why should I even pay my power bill? So they just went for 100% offset. So yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Of course,
And
supporting the son as well, right?
and
So
whenever they have any additional credits, I just use some of it for mine. So yeah.
Nice.
so
Yeah.
what about you, Matthew?
Yeah. So, like, I offset my power bills at home, parents' place as well. So those are the two places where digital solar comes into play. In terms of other investments, my mom recently made me join a chit fund. So that's its own thing. I mean, it's a long struggle with her on why not and all that stuff. Anyways, so there is that piece. But, I mean, it's a KSFE, so it's like the government-run one. In Kerala.
Then
Yeah,
that's fine.
Okay.
yeah. I was like, I'm not touching any private ones anyway. And she was pretty adamant that I join one. She was like,
Okay.
yeah.
So
Apart
no
from that,
equity and mutual fund.
I do. So I have a couple of, and I'm a huge fan of small case as a product category.
Right.
Like I generally don't have time to sit and understand each and every stock, but as a basket, it just
Right.
makes more easier for me. So there is that.
Makes
And
sense,
then even recently, the passive fund that Zerodha opened up, the house fund,
Yeah.
that I took up. Let's see if I will get something in that. But yeah, those are some of the pieces that I've done. And then also, I think just to experiment, did some crypto. I don't know what the value of that is anyways. Just wanted to know how. No, for me it was more of a UX problem. Like, how do these wallets work? And then basically just like went around.
Okay.
So that was like a small piece over there. But yeah, I think that's about it.
Makes
Yeah.
sense. Great. Talking with you guys, and great having you on this podcast as well. I think so. I have learned pretty much about digital solar, PPA agreements, and how can you make these models sustainable as well. I hope you guys do something for EV vehicles, or charging, all that sort of stuff as well. Let's see. It's a journey. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. And for our viewers, if you have any questions for the SundayGrids team, please do join our WhatsApp community and post them. Matthew is also part of that community, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer any questions. Directly get in touch with Matthew as well, with any questions you have about the digital solar service agreement or anything else. And definitely like, share, and subscribe, my standard line, because we need to grow.